Alright, you titans, you guys have to have one of the coolest interactions I have seen in Destiny 2 so far. Not only can you ignite entire rooms of enemies with your slam, you can call forth lightning like Thor himself and add that to your powerful slam. Anything that's left alive will have the Jolt debuff applied to them, and chain lightning to enemies, which means this one slam can now handle all 3 champion types, which is pretty crazy. Jolt for overloads, ignition for unstoppables, and you become radiant to handle barrier champions. Now between the ignition from the slam getting a 20% damage buff this season, and the 2 artifact mods called Shield Crush and Transference, which both of those buff the damage to our consecration slam, the slam hits plenty hard in difficult content, as you can see in the gameplay. So we don't want to buff that damage anymore with something like synthos or knockout, but instead you want to make sure you can even stay alive while slamming over and over, because if you can't, then what's the point? That's where we add great damage resistance at roughly 80%, which allows you to tank so much more. Then we add quite a bit of crowd control with freezing and jolt and lightning to help stay alive, and then we add utility to keep our abilities up and allow them to just handle wave after wave of enemies. Then we make sure we have some healing built into the build, because when you're at around 80% damage reduction, you don't need that much healing to survive, you just need a little bit. So this all starts with our damage reduction, and if you don't understand or get this part down, you won't be able to survive as you push up in harder content. The first thing we have to talk about is Amplified. Now we have 2 ways of becoming amplified with this build. Our Consecration Slam, when it lets out the lightning and jolt, and when it kills enemies, that can make you amplified. And also your Pulse Grenade, when that kills enemies, it can make you amplified. And the amplified buff lasts for 15 seconds. And then we pair that with the artifact mod called Galvanic Armor. So when you have amplified up, paired with that mod, you're gonna get a 30% damage reduction in all content, just as long as you have amplified and it lasts for 15 seconds. So it's pretty easy to keep up. Next we add in Facet of Protection. This I believe is a 15% damage reduction, and that even goes higher when you're Transcendence, but we'll just leave it at 15% to cover our base. Then you have 100 Resilience, which is roughly 30% damage reduction, and you want to be rocking 100 Resilience all the time. And then lastly we add in Woven Mail, which is a 45% damage reduction. Now to proc Facet of Protection, you just need to be near 3 enemies or more, which we always are. And then to proc Woven Mail, you just have to pick up an Orb of Power while you're using the Strand subclass. And we pair this with the awesome weapon Kvostov. That allows us to pick up Orb of Powers from far away. So you get a 45% damage reduction from Woven Mail, 30% from Galvanic Armor and Amplified, 15% at base from Facet of Protection, and 30% from 100 Resilience. When you do the math on that, it's about 77%. And then that can go up even higher when you're Transcendence, because you get more from Facet of Protection. Instead of 15%, that turns into 25% or 30%. So while you're Transcendence, you're pushing over 80% damage reduction, and that's huge in difficult content. And what we just went over can be applied to any of the other 2 classes as well, Warlock or Hunter. You just set it up the exact same way. So again, take the Strand Super, so we get Woven Mail from Orbs. You do want to take Thruster as your class ability, and Thruster is a huge catalyst to this build, so it's really important. So make sure to pay attention to the thruster part. We take Frenzy Blade to get those 3 Consecration Slams, and we take Pulse Grenade that we already went over as well. Of course, for your 2 aspects, Consecration is one of them, and your second aspect is going to be Diamond Lance. You see me create all those lances and throw them. Defeating any target with an ability can spawn a lance, which your Consecration is going to be doing all the time, and you can pick that up and throw it at your next group of enemies to then have crowd control and be safely moving into that group. And I'm doing this all solo. Now for the fragments, we went over Facet of Protection for your damage resistance, and then Facet of Purpose to get Woven Mail and Orb pickup. For your last 4 fragments, a big one that I like to take is Facet of Awakening. I haven't seen very many people talk about this fragment, but rapidly defeating targets with light or darkness damage, or super final blows, generates an elemental pickup of the matching damage type. You also get 10 resilience with this. When you get 3 kills back to back, if it's from arc damage, which is our Consecration, that can create a Ionic Trace for you. Same thing with your Pulse Grenade, another Ionic Trace. Your Slam can also create a Fire Sprite when you blow up a big group of enemies. Your Diamond Lance, when you throw it and shatter enemies, that can create a Stasis Crystal. Now the Ionic Traces are the really big ones here. Those give you roughly about 15% ability energy to all 3 of your abilities. For your next fragment, we take Facet of Ruin. This just increases the size and damage of the burst of stasis and the area of effect of our solar ignitions. You also do want to take Facet of Dawn and harder content. I know we can become Radiant while picking up an Orb of Power, but sometimes when you're one-on-one with a barrier champion and you do your slam, you'll have Radiant for 5 seconds afterwards. So when he pops that barrier, you'll have time to shoot it with one of your weapons to stun him. And then lastly, this is a flex spot, but I do like to take Facet of Grace. Defeating targets with kinetic weapons grants you bonus Transcendence energy, and I am pairing that with Kvostov. I used it in my last Warlock build, and I'm telling you guys, if you haven't tried Kvostov in harder content, break that thing out. It is so good. Other than that, the rest of the weapons didn't even matter with the build because I hardly used them, and I did pair this with the exotic class item that I got to drop recently. It came with Spirit of Inmost Light and Spirit of Contact. Spirit of Contact is damaging a target with powered melee, causes all nearby targets to suffer lightning strikes and become jolted. That's where we get the Thor part in the build and the Jolt debuff. And then the first perk is Spirit of Inmost Light. Using an ability empowers the other two abilities, granting them improved energy regeneration. This just helps keeps that ability flow going across the board, and since we're getting Thruster back so often, we're just keep pushing that into our melee and our grenade. Now speaking of Thruster, I want to talk about the mods on our boots and our class item. On the boots, we take Recuperation, so we replenish 70 HP on orb pickup. When you pair that with 80% damage reduction, it's really good. Then we add Insulation. We reduce our class ability cooldown by 4% when we pick up an orb. And then we pair that with Absolution. So we get all ability cooldown across the board when we pick up an orb of power, but for class ability, that's 10%. So we're really trying to feed that class ability. And on our class item, we throw on Utility Kickstart. So when we pick up an Orb of Power, we become Charged with Light, and when we use our Thruster with 3 Charges of Light, we'll get 28% of our class ability back instantly. Next, you throw on Reaper, so when you get a weapon kill after using your Thruster, it'll spawn Orb of Power. And then lastly, Powerful Attraction. Automatically collects nearby Orbs of Power when you activate your class ability. This is a big one, because your rotation normally is just go into your Consecration Slam, you're probably going to kill an enemy in the group in front of you, and then you just hit your Thruster ability. Your Thruster ability is proccing your heart ×2 for ability regeneration from our class item. It's then healing you for 70 HP because it automatically picks up the orb that's close to us. It gives us about 15% of our class ability back because we picked up that Orb of Power paired with Insulation and Absolution. And then if you did have your stacks of Utility Kickstart ready, it gave you roughly 28%. And then on top of that, you probably created a Ionic Trace with the Slam or your Pulse Grenade, and that feeds your Thruster as well. And then that's not including the Spirit of Inmost Light regeneration that you're feeding into your Thruster when you're using your Grenade or your melee. So that's how we can keep this loop going really easily, and you want to have that Thruster up as much as possible because that's your source of healing paired with your 80% damage reduction. Now on the chest piece, just add your resistance mods for whatever activity you're doing. On the gauntlets, I take 2 heavy-handeds. That means every 5 seconds we can spawn Orb of Power with our melees. Since Consecration is a little slower, 2 of these normally work best. And then I also like to pair it with Focusing Strike. Grants class ability energy when you cause damage with a powered melee attack. So again, every slam we do is feeding that class ability and creating Orbs of Power. On the helmet, we take double hands-on. As you can see in the gameplay, you get your super back so quickly, and then also a kinetic siphon, so your Kvostov can spawn Orbs of Power. So I hope you guys give this build a shot, and I hope you enjoy it. And if you haven't seen any of the build videos you see up on screen, make sure to give them a watch, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a great rest of your day.